And we are recording today's session. We're trying to figure all that out so that we can kind of publish these for later. If you weren't able to join, we had several people email that said, "Great, you picked a terrible time to have it." So we will. We're trying our best to record it, and then Daniel will probably create a blog about it for our future. So, and if you haven't seen it already on our website, Daniel's been working hard to update it and add more content. So if you go under here under the blog, you can see a bunch of did you knows, kind of, that we call it, where it's sorry, my mouse gets to fall apart right during the middle of this. So different topics. So here is a cheat sheet from the totals that we did last month. And so you can find different topics. Some are videos, so you can look at different things that we have available. Some are written out, that type of thing. So our hope is that once we get this recording stuff figured out, we will add it to the blog post from that standpoint. Okay, with that magic chime, we'll get started. Thanks everybody for joining us. Again, we're doing these as a monthly offering. If you have another topic you'd like us to cover, feel free to add it to the chat window. We're going to be doing this once a month, typically on Thursdays. Usually I'm trying to do it the first week of the month, but with the holiday and stuff, last week I was a little off. So we got to be the second week for this time, but we'll be doing this as monthly as much as we can, and we'll be hitting a different topic each month. So we'll go ahead and get started. And if you do run into questions, I'll kind of prompt for questions at certain periods. So feel free at that point to turn your microphones on and ask for some questions as far as that goes. So back to our slideshow. So custom queries, it's a very important tool that we put into the program years ago. It's one of the things that we try to make the program customizable, and it gives us a reporting function. It gives us a lot of different things that we can do with it within the program. And the important word there is custom, meaning we can do things for you, for your particular customer, with your particular data, and give you information that is specific to you without having to change the program. We're just writing a script. We want to encourage you to be able to write your own queries. So don't feel you always have to pay us to write them for you. If you choose that, that's great. We don't mind the business, but we want to really today highlight what you can do with queries, how they can be used, some examples of some queries, and what we can use them within our program. So thanks everybody for joining us. We have 12 people, so I appreciate all that. Introduction. Then we're going to go over SQL, some data definitions, writing a few queries, using some queries, and then a summary. My intent is to be done by 1:40 with the content, and then be able to ask some questions. We'll have some question times during some of the content too, but kind of open-ended questions at the end of the discussion or at the end of the session. So introduction. As we talked about last month, there's different types of reporting functions that we can do within the program. So there's crystal reports, there's the total screens that we talked about in detail last month, there's grid print, there's queries, and there's actually a couple more I should have added to this. One is the business stats, and also charts that we can do. So real quickly, from within the program, as far as where you find these things, we have we have underneath kind of each module has a query custom screen. So when you bring it up, that's for the inventory. And so these are queries that you or we have defined for you ahead of time, and so that you can run these and make them available to your users kind of depending on module. So one of the good things here is you kind of could choose which kind of queries or and to show them, choose where they're going to show up. And so different things here. And then you can hit the refresh button and get content from the screen in a query. So this is the basic custom query, but our queries kind of can be used in a few other places. So we also have the business stats, which is some people have called this the beach ball off to the right-hand side. This is some old data, so it doesn't have as much current month-to-date stuff. But literally we can write queries that are generic or that are very specific to your organization that will display information in what we call business status, or some people call it, benchmarks that they want to reach, or there's another word for it, I just forgot. But you can display those.
KPI.
Yeah, KPIs, those kind of things to see from the system. So this is a query those are queries as well, that are in the business stats. We've got the basic queries. We also have grid or chart type queries. So this example showing a graph kind of thing, and that's found underneath the graph chart/graph under the different modules. And then we also have under the tools, we have utilities SQL window. Now that's reserved for the administrator type access for this one. So we don't want everybody to have access to this one because you can do stuff that maybe you shouldn't. And then one thing I forgot is there's utility queries, and that's under each module. You can have a utility query that can change data. So if you think of a utility versus our other queries, a utility can be written that will change data within your system. So we have the ability, most of our queries are called select queries, which they're just bringing data back to the user. These utility queries or the SQL window query, they literally can be written to say, I want to run something. I want to change the data in some fashion. And so it's a good way, we call them utilities, but it's something that if you want to update data, you want to change something on a daily basis, you can run those as a utility as well. Any questions right now for the types of queries that we do? Hey, I'm going to keep going unless people are slow to unmute themselves. So back to, so all kinds of different queries that are really based off the same script as far as how they're written. We went over the grid, the graph, the utility, the SQL window. We also went over the business stats, those kind of things. SQL, just the definition of that, the structured query language. It's used across many and all databases. So most databases, you can use an SQL script to get information out of a database. Ours, the Advantage database that we use, is no exception. You can get data from it writing an SQL script. One thing to note is there are different versions of SQL. So when we're talking about writing SQL scripts for us, a lot of it is generic, but there is nuances or differences. So if you look up or have a query from something else, it may not exactly work. There could be how it's formatted or written in Advantage database versus a different database. So there can be some nuances, but there is a lot of commonality between the SQL. And there's ways to, the other main thing is to understand the database. And so when you're writing an SQL, you're writing a script that's asking for, I want a certain amount of information from, and you got to know table or the field or what type of information it is. So we provide you a crystal report that you should find in your system. And if you don't, you can download this report. But it's the data definition, and you should be able to go to reports and find the report thing, and it's called data structure. And so if you run this report, this is giving you a live look at what the current database tables include in your system. And as you can see, there's a lot of these in there. So, but this is a good cheat sheet if you end up writing queries that you can look up, well, let's say for an AR invoice. So what's the invoice? Well, I want to know what's the overpayment. Okay, that's a Boolean, which means true or false. And what's the create date? You can look up the fields that are within that table. And so it's kind of a cheat sheet to know what to write when you're writing a query. I want to know this piece of information. And so this is our attempt to kind of provide that to you. So that, again, was under the reports and data structure. Now, if you don't have it in your database, you can go to our online system, and when you're under the help menu, you can get to the see, I'm going to leave the program here to mine. Sign in. We have a OneDrive, so you can access the OneDrive account, which is our shared information, and it won't ask you for these passwords because it's shared to you. So you can see there's information here to install our program. There's reports, and you'll find this data structure report there available for download. So you can find that Daniel did post the link to our OneDrive in your chat window, so you can use that as well. So that data structure, if you don't find it in your database, whether somebody deleted it or it wasn't there, you can download it and save it into your reports folder. So back to that. The other thing of information that's also available out there is our help files, and one of them is the Advantage help file. So the Advantage help file is very useful for learning the nuances of how Advantages works as far as their as far as how they've written their SQL or the nuances. And so this is that help file. And so you'll catch me when I'm writing an SQL for you. I'll look under supported SQL grammar right here. And down underneath there, there's different information as to, what do I want to look up as to how to write a script. So that help file is available to you as well. Online resources, I usually will point people to like the W3 schools. They have a whole section on SQL. You can search Google for things on SQL. There's lots of other stuff. There's blogs. So there's a lot of ways that you can learn how to work with the SQL. There's a lot of resources out there. For sure, we can be a resource to you. Daniel posted the W3 Schools link in the chat for you that's specific to SQL. But the basic thing I want to tell you is it's not, Daniel and I may have used it a lot, so we're very familiar with it. We're very familiar with the database, so we can write a query very well. But that's not that you can't do it yourself. So when we're looking at writing queries, this is like the SQL window from under the tools menu. There's a certain format to some of the simple ones where it's just a select asterisk from and a table. And so those are the big words that you'll use, select from and where. Those are used over and over again. There's a lot of other information that you put between those words or after the where as to how to get the content or how to organize it. There's a lot of information in there, but those are kind of the keywords for the select queries. If we're doing utility type queries, we use other words like update. One word of caution, it's, it can be a lot of trouble when we get into writing queries and when we're looking at queries. If we don't know what we're doing, an update query can be very destructive to your data. So please, if you have concerns about doing those kind of things, please reach out to us on that. But anything with a select type statement, those are really safe because all you're doing is saying, bring data back to me. So let's look at a few different types of queries. For here, this one was an inventory value by type. And so if you look down below here in this window here, there is actually an SQL as to how it's written. So it's an actual example here that we're going to select the type name. So that's your inventory type. We put a 1 in there as a space holder for the graph type versions. And then we do a summation of the average cost times the quantity on hand, and that equals the value. So in this case right here, we can look at aluminum raw materials is 65,000. So it kind of uses that hint type thing, and then we can go back to everything. So you can click back and forth between the different types and to see, okay, there's $6,000 in the pipe category, or you can go into that. So this one is a graph or a chart version of of a query, but behind the scenes, it is just this text type information. Let me show you that. So under defaults, query custom, and we were underneath the inventory. And here's where we set these up. So the administrator or whoever's the administrator should have access to this screen and they can add, it's a mode form that you're probably used to, that you have to hit mode there. And in here, there's the script that we're talking about. And so it's kind of, some of it to me, it makes a lot of sense to you. You say, hey, that's all Greek to me, but some of the logic in it, it's just selecting information and then how are we formatting it and what kind of thing. So I'm going to copy it. So when we're creating these, we save it to here. We had to tell it was a chart. I had to tell it was what kind of a chart. And then there's some other choices in here when we're defining a query. But all of your queries that are used in this custom area are saved to this window. And this window again was under defaults, query custom setup. And so you'll find in here all kinds of different ones. if I organize it by category. So in this example, we've saved a bunch of different ones, but here's the business stat ones. And so the only trick with the business stat ones, they have to return a single value. So when we were writing those queries, we're saying some, and there's some simple math things that you may be familiar with, like rounding or a summation, things like that. But we're going to sum here all the information from the AP invoice where the month, so that's again kind of an SQL formula to say what's the month of a date equals the current date. So there's, again, some of these are in our examples. And so that's another great way to learn it is to say, do you have an example of something like this? And we can get you an example of different ones. And so this, the way this is written, it will only return a single value here so that it will show up here as far as current AP in that value. Okay. So all these queries can be added, edited, you can suspend them, you can delete them, you kind of want to clean them up once in a while. Maybe we set them up and put them in there for you, and now it's not as useful. And so you may not want it anymore. So I know one of our customers, I need to help clean up some of their queries just because we ended up with so many of them over the past 12 years they've been on the system. So that's just good to understand. But this is where you save them. And when I save them into a particular module, then it will be available to you underneath sales query custom. So anything that's in that category, then it becomes available to pick from on this list. Okay. Any questions so far? So I'll continue on. Hopefully people have some questions at the end. Um, the the other types of queries we were examples. So we talked about the chart query. And again, you can drill down into it. But there's some other functions in the queries that you can use. Things like the goal number in here, that's only used for the business stat. Okay. The use date in this, we want to, when we're looking at a query, there's a from and a to up here. So depending on the query, see how it's kind of grayed out. It doesn't let me click into there. So this one, we didn't write it using those dates. So if the box isn't checked for use dates, then it's not going to show up. But if we look at one here where percent on time, the way it was written, scroll up here, on time, there we go. The way this query is written, at the very end, we use a formula that says between, the ship date is between, and that's a colon, date from, and colon, date to. And so if this is in your SQL and the box is checked for use date, then it's going to say, hey, you need to use that date. So if we look at sales, I'm going to go up to here to sales, query custom, drop down, pick on-time shipments by customer. And so now it's letting me choose or click into that box. This company that allowed us to use the data, it's a couple years old, so I'm going to go backwards. And so we had to put that in there, and then we picked the refresh. And so now here it's giving me, in this report, this one was kind of used for a quality metric, was to say, show me the customers by name and show what their on-time status was. So this one here, we are 100% on time. And so down below here is a script that is showing that math. And it gets a little more complicated as to how that data is put together. But if you can at least see that potential of, I can't get this information out of the system easily. And we're totally good with that critique. And then we'll come back and say, well, have you tried a custom query? Can we help you write a custom query? Because things like this where it's summation, it's boiling down the data for analytics, maybe it's used for your quality program, any of those kind of things, maybe we don't have it in there. And one important thing that I forgot to mention with the types of reports earlier is if you use a crystal report, those are really great for printing out a report, where queries are really great for if you want to export them because they're already in a grid type format. So you can always kick it into Excel and, it brings that data directly in the same format. It's in a grid and it easily exports from a query. So that's another good reason to use a query is if you ever want to export a certain kind of information, a query that's written for that purpose too. So we've looked at kind of the different areas of the queries. We've looked at that you can use date ranges in your queries as kind of a parameter. We also have another option down here where you can write a query as a parameter. And go to a different example of that. So under payables, query custom, I'm going to look for AP invoice detail by PO number. So we wrote this for one of our customers, or Daniel did, not me. And here we can type in a specific PO number that I wrote down in advance so I wouldn't mess up. And then I can hit refresh and it's going to query that data and it allows you to give a specific parameter so as to focus what data you're wanting to bring back. And so it's an option that we do when we're writing the queries. You don't have to use this, but it's available if we do need to use it. So in this example of the AP invoice detail, so I'm going to find that one in my setup here, payables by PO. We had checked this box right here where it says use parameter. And then in the query itself, we had included text that said S, the colon, you'll notice that has to do with parameters, S param. And so that's what's grabbing that data from that box when we're running the program. Now remember, one of the real benefits of this is you write it once, and that's the hard part. But then you can use it time and time again, and you can even then pass it off to other users that may not be as savvy or they don't understand it, but they can run the report for them. And so they don't have to know all this script. They just knew they needed to look up the AP invoice detail by PO. So we've created a tool for them to kind of query that information in that way. So that's an example where we use the parameter down here. Daniel, can you think of a few examples that we've written for customers and how they've used the power of queries?
Yeah, some of them wanted to look at, for example, obsolete inventory or slow moving inventory over a given amount of time. Maybe in the bottom right hand corner, we allow them to type they want to go back 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, or maybe they want to enter it by days. we have, maybe where they want to look at cost for a particular item or some history, and so they type in a part number. I have one customer where they wanted to see all the sales orders and work order association by either typing the sales order number or the work order number. And so I was able to write that for them where they type in either one they have and it brings back the rest of the data, stuff like that.
Yeah. And so, like, here's an example that Daniel mentioned, and this is utilizing the SQL window, which is a good place to kind of test queries. And this one, we're writing a query to get us the data of all the items that we haven't had transactions on in 2 years or 730 days. So it's basically saying, show me all the item numbers where we don't have anything in the item history for the past 2 years, because maybe those we should suspend them or we should look at them as to why they haven't been used. So in this case, we've used, select the item number, the item description, the quantity on hand, the warehouse ID. Now, some people that only use one warehouse, that becomes less important. And then you can even write if statements in this script. So this one is IIF for if, and we look at which costing method it is to determine whether it's average cost or standard cost, and that returns the value of that. And then we have to connect tables. So we're looking at it from the iBalance, which is your quantity on hand table, and we're connecting it to the item table, and we're connecting it to the item type table. So as to look at the item type, and we wrote into the where clause, we only want to look at stuff that had quantity on hand. So again, in this one, it's kind of an obsolete inventory query where we're saying, wait, we have quantity, but we don't have transactions for 2 years. And then we look into this one. This is kind of a subquery, so they can get a little more complicated, where we say, show me all the items that's not in that last 2 years worth of activity. So this is an example that you can use or we can use to say, show me all my obsoletes, or show me the information that's going on in my database that's not being used, to draw attention to it from that standpoint. So some of those different types of queries. We talked about analysis, exceptions. Some people like to do managed by exception. So you can write SQL queries that say, show me the new item numbers that were set up this week, so that I double check who entered those. So I want to use it for supervision. Some people will use it for accountability or for measurements to say, hey, we need to put more attention into this area. We can look at cleaning up data, as to, hey, we have this old orders, we have items like that obsolete example we just looked at haven't been sold or used in the last 2 years. We talked about exporting because remember, it gives you a nice grid type format. And then information, you might want to format it. Sometimes for the boss, for the owner, you want to be able to boil it down into simple summations or a simple grid as to the information. One of our customers, they wanted to know cash received by date. And so we wrote a little query just to show how much cash, receivables came in today, just so they could see that on a readily, everyday basis. So I should say questions here. So if anybody has some questions, I'd love to answer questions as to examples where you've thought about or you'd like to look at data, or those kind of things. And if you're asking a question and I am not responding, check your mute button, please.
One thing, Claire, can you show the goal direction and the coloring, how that works with the business stats?
Sure. So um, the best thing on that is to look at an example here where the current AR is showing $285,000 and it's currently showing in red. So if I come back to our query setup screen and I'm going to filter it to the business stats, then I can find this current AR uh, one here. Our goal number in this example was set to 300,000. And so we said our goal is to have it above that number. So if it's below that number, it shows red. And if it's above that number based on the direction, because sometimes you want your measurements to say, oh, I want it to be less than a certain value. So I'm trying to use the green for positive and the red for negative, or we are achieving our goal or we're not achieving the goal. So if I come in here and I change this to 200,000, and I'm going to save this by okaying this screen, and I can refresh this. And if everything goes wonderful behind the magic curtain, that should convert to green. And it does. So there you go. Great question, Daniel. Thank you. Somebody else with a question. And if you're talking, I can't hear you, you can always put it in the chat window. And
Can
Daniel
you
will.
talk for a minute about the primary and what the sum list does?
Sure. Go ahead. Somebody else had a question, so we'll see. No. Okay, I'll show that, but feel free to type in a question on your chat or unmute yourself to ask a question. So Daniel, you were asking about the sum list was one of your examples. And so I'm going to find one down here for WIP hours. So they had written a custom WIP analysis as to how much hours were in WIP for this customer. And in it, we can look at the query itself here, mode. And one good trick here is you can highlight this and Control C or copy, and you can bring it over to the SQL window. And I can paste it. Go. So this had manufacturer order number, task number, item, description, that kind of information. And if we can scroll across to the bottom, they had WIP hours, labor cost, extended cost. So they wanted some of those extended values to give you a total at the bottom. So in this example, they just needed extended cost right here. So by putting this in here, by putting the name of the column, that adds it automatically. So I'm going to do it for another one just as an example. So I'm going to put WIP hours. So it's got to be written the exact same way. So I'm going to cheat and copy it out of up here, WIP hours. And then I go back to the definition here, and I'm going to try to keep them in order. And you can put a comma between them to do have it show a total at the bottom. And then okay. So now, and I have to save it by okaying down here. So now when I come to manufacturing and I come to query custom and I come into WIP hours, and I hit refresh, it now has added this total of 275 hours to the bottom of your grid. So some people would go, well, you could just export it to Excel, but if you don't want to do that before, you want to see it in the grid and then you see the extended cost, you can see it from that standpoint. Okay. Any other questions?
How many chart types are there?
I believe there's 4. Let me look it up and check. Yeah, bar, column, line, and pie. And the biggest thing with those ones, with the chart ones, it's kind of like you have to kind of fudge your format just a little bit to have a placeholder kind of in the middle. So in this case, the trans date was the example here. So
It's like another field that can pivot the data by in order to make the chart or something like that.
exactly. And we
And
have
what can you tell them what primary does again?
oh, sure. Thank you for reminding me of that. So under purchasing, we have standard purchase query set up as primary. That one, there's only one for, I believe, the purchasing category. Let's look at the manufacturing one. We may want to look, so we can set this capacity versus hours on order to be the primary. And so with us saving that as the primary, now you can only have one primary per module. And so we hit OK. And so I go to manufacturing query custom. It automatically defaults it into that drop down is what the primary does. So it just allows it to be quicker. If you have somebody that's not as skilled on using the system, you can basically kind of make it easier for them by making it primary. So that's what it does for you.
We should also note that there's a find, search box at the bottom. So even before you have to export your data to Excel, like you can do a refresh and grab a certain amount of data, but then you can further filter it just with the search box at the bottom. I believe that searches every single field in your data grid.
It does.
So I've got like a lot of customers who they may grab all the sales orders for a certain thing, but then they'll filter it further using the find at the bottom. So
Correct.
you don't always have to filter everything in the query. You could,
So in this example, we can type the word mold and it filtered the data to the ones that had the word mold in it. So that's where you can use that. And then you use that in any of your grids. The big thing is to hit clear to make it show all your data again.
they can also save their query layouts using that button at the bottom left. So you can, adjust your column widths and then save it. And it'll remember that next time you run that query, this is how you want it laid out on your screen.
Right. So we have the little screen form settings, and so when we do the refresh on the query, you can resize the screen. You can move the columns around, things like that, and then you can hit save current. And so that does it not only by this screen, but by the query name itself. And so that saves a lot of time if you're running a query a lot of times and then having to drag or stretch the columns, to make it bigger or easier to read, things like that. So by saving that format will save you time. Just remember, if you do rewrite your query or change the number of columns, you may need to kind of restore the default and then set up your saving the screen.
And if any of our customers, you guys needed, a printable version of these queries, then we could just make another Crystal report for you. That could be a free run Crystal report under reports, so we can do data friendly or print friendly of the data.
Daniel's doing a good job filling in on questions. Is anybody else I can bait into asking a question? And I'll apologize if you're asking and I'm not hearing you. A couple other types of queries that can be done is you can put queries underneath a customer too. So there is some that you can literally, there is a query tab underneath the customer screen. So you can do the on time or the item lead time. These ones were set up to say we want it to be specific to the customer. And so this is again, we wrote these queries in place where it's saying where the customer equals this name. So that then you hit refresh. I don't think they have any data, but I picked the wrong customer. But you could look at, so queries can be built into these screens, not just the customer, the vendor has that same option. When you look at a customer, there's a query there as well. And there's also under the inventory, the item. When we look at a list of items, there is oh no, we're talking about adding that one. I'm sorry. We don't have the query for the
One that we have, Claire, is under the tools exporting, where we've built stuff for, like bank portals and, positive pay, that type of stuff.
Yeah. So if any of you have that kind of requirement um, for doing kind of, if your bank requires some of that stuff, there's some great ways we can set up a query over here for exporting data.
So it kind of formats a predefined CSV file that you can upload, for them.
Sometimes we just had a request to do that for one of our customers where their customer is so large that they use a EDI type thing, and they say, oh, we don't accept regular invoices anymore. You have to upload it to our big SAP or whatever it is. And so we can create a formatted grid or a query to provide that information in a format that will match what that customer's requirement is. So that's another example how we use the SQL.
The total setup for quality is the last one I can think of related to that.
Yeah, and that one's really complex. There's levels of complexity where there's a whole total setup screen here that we like to use those, especially if you're in a situation where you're having to meet or regulatory compliance, where you're having to document and show quality records, things like that. This is a great where we help you create information as to uh, things, and all this stuff is in SQL. And so again, the beauty of the SQL, where we just save it here, we didn't have to rewrite the program. We just had to save it, or we had to write it specific for you, that customer, and then just save it into your database. So it's a lot less expense than us writing a custom program for you, that type of thing. So, and again, we love to teach and if you want us to help, but we want to encourage you to learn some of this stuff so that you can write, simple queries to be able to utilize the system better. So, some of them you don't have to be super fancy to write a simple query where we just select asterisk from item. So I'm going to select everything from the item table. And so that's going to return everything from the item table. And then you can say, well, let's limit it to just certain fields. Let's select the item number and the item description from item. And so that's where we're selecting 2 fields out of many possible to find or to get. And then, like we originally talked about, the where, and then we can say things like where suspended is equal to false. So I don't want to see the suspended items. So that's an example of very simple query that you could write with very little training to understand the database.
Do you want to tell them what that table tab does in that window?
No.
Okay, not really relevant to the query. Okay.
Not relevant to the query. Sorry. That's a good one to use for your administrators. So we'll save that for
We
you.
have some customers that, you like to develop your own script. Maybe you just want our eyeballs on it to just, give a thumbs up that, hey, yeah, that looks good, or tweak it for you. We can help you guys with that. And we could do training classes if you'd like to do in groups or one-on-ones, just let us know.
And then we have some new exciting features coming out with queries over the next month. Is we now have a function that we're just finishing testing on, that if you have a utility query where you want, say, I want to do some update or some fixing of the data or some updating of the data overnight, we now will have a way. There's a little extra cost in it, but there's a way for us to load another program and say run that query every night, and so it will automatically do it instead of having to tell somebody, remember to run this once a day or remember to run this once a month, that type of thing. So if any of that is interest to you, feel free to reach out to us. Like I said, we're just finishing the beta on that. Well, I like questions, so please, if there's anybody that has a question, I'd love to answer one. Whoever is the phone caller might be talking, but I don't see who that is. Well, again, we so appreciate you as customers, and we're trying to add these kind of improvements to how we serve you and options and what we can do. Feel free to email us or put in the chat window what other topics you'd like us to cover, and then we'll come back to you next month. So I really appreciate all you taking some time to learn with us, and hopefully this is helpful. Please let us know if it was helpful to you as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.